Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
There's a certain comfort in the official story, isn't there?
Oh, definitely.
A huge scandal breaks, you get a simple narrative, a clear villain, and eventually a resolution. And with Jeffrey Epstein, that narrative was perfectly packaged.
He was the perverted billionaire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The lone wolf with a private island who used his money to commit these horrific crimes.
It's the bad apple theory, right? If you can just isolate the problem to one guy, you don't have to examine the whole system.
It's horrific,
Right.
but it's contained. Well, today, we're going to break that container wide open. We're drawing primarily from the book One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb, and also research from Mike Benz, and they tell a completely different story.
They argue that the perverted billionaire story isn't just incomplete, it's a cover.
A cover for what, exactly?
For what is essentially a function of the state.
Yeah.
The sources we're looking at claim Epstein wasn't just a rich guy with a dark side. They say he was a financial operative, a bagman,
For who?
working directly for intelligence agencies, specifically the CIA, the Israeli Mossad, and what the sources call the modern British Empire.
Okay, that is a massive claim. It sounds like a spy novel. But our mission today is to just follow the evidence laid out in these documents. We're going to trace Epstein's career path.
From a prep school classroom to the absolute top of the deep state.
And we're going to examine why these analysts believe his sexual crimes were actually secondary to his real job, running global financial operations for spies.
And we should warn you, once you start pulling on this thread, the whole official story just kind of unravels. You stop seeing a sex scandal and you start seeing an infrastructure scandal.
So let's start at the beginning, the origin story. Because the story usually starts when he's already rich, right? Flying the Lolita Express. But these sources point to a huge red flag, a massive anomaly, right at the start of his career. Before all the money, Jeffrey Epstein was a teacher.
At the Dalton School in New York City. And you have to understand, Dalton isn't just some private school. It is the elite prep school in Manhattan. It's where the heads of banks, of media, the political dynasties, it's where they all send their kids.
And here's a thing that never made any sense, and the sources really hammer this home. He was hired to teach math and physics.
High-level stuff.
But he didn't have a college degree. He was a dropout.
Right, 0 credentials.
So how does a college dropout get a job teaching physics to the children of the Manhattan elite? That just doesn't happen. You don't walk in off the street for that.
It's the first real glitch in the official story. And the answer, according to Whitney Webb's research, is the man who hired him, the headmaster of Dalton at the time, a man named Donald Barr.
Barr. Okay, that name is ringing a bell.
It definitely should. Donald Barr is the father of the former Attorney General Bill Barr.
Wow.
But what's really key here isn't his son, it's Donald Barr's own background. Before running a school, he was in OSS.
The Office of Strategic Services.
Which was the direct precursor to the CIA.
Okay, so let's just connect these dots for a second. An OSS veteran is running an elite school, and he hires an unqualified 20-something dropout to teach the kids of the most powerful people in the country.
What are the odds?
The sources are implying this wasn't an HR mistake, are they?
They're implying it was a recruitment, that Epstein was hired into an act. I mean, think about it. If you want to find talent, someone smart, maybe a sociopath, someone malleable, and you want to put them in a place where they can mix with the most powerful families in the world.
Dalton is the perfect incubator. It's a placement.
Exactly.
So he's not just teaching algebra, he's being positioned. And the materials say that even then, he was punching way above his social weight class. He was showing up at the mansion of Sir James Goldsmith.
A top British financier. And this is what sets the stage for the next jump. He goes from the classroom to Wall Street. He lands at Bear Stearns.
And again, it's not some entry-level job. He thrives. He's mentored by Ace Greenberg, the head of the firm. So this is where the Bagman training really starts, right? What was he actually doing there? Because I'm guessing it wasn't just picking stocks for retirement funds.
No, not at all. He specialized in what the sources call esoteric financial products.
Which is such a polite Wall Street way of saying laundering.
Well, yeah, essentially. He was specializing in tax avoidance, moving money through the cracks in the system. But you have to know the context of Bear Stearns at the time. The sources draw a direct line between what they were doing then and the 2008 financial crash.
Wait, how does Epstein in the 80s connect to the 2008 crash?
It's the methodology. Bear Stearns was a hub for fabricated securities, for these insane derivative bets. A lot of those toxic assets, the mortgage-backed securities that blew up the global economy, the source says they were being fabricated out of their City of London office.
London. There's that British connection again.
It's not an accident. The City of London is basically a state within a state. It's a hub for offshore banking, for avoiding U.S. regulations. So at Bear Stearns, Epstein isn't just learning to make money. He's learning the plumbing of the dark economy.
How to hide money, how to move capital without a paper trail.
Exactly. He's acquiring the very specific skill set that intelligence agencies need. Because if you need to fund a black op, you can't just write a check from the Treasury. You need a guy. You need a bagman.
Okay, so he learns the trade. He has the skills. But then he leaves Bear Stearns, and this is where the story shifts from just corrupt banker to something else entirely.
Right.
The cast of characters changes. We're not just talking about investors now. We're talking about arms dealers.
This is maybe the strongest evidence for the intelligence asset argument. You just have to look at who he aligns with after Wall Street. He starts working directly with Adnan Khashoggi.
Khashoggi, that's the Saudi arms dealer, right?
One of the biggest in history. The sources call him very dirty, which is an understatement. Khashoggi was the money behind the Iran-Contra scandal.
The scheme where the U.S. secretly sold weapons to Iran to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. Something Congress had explicitly banned.
Exactly. A massive illegal covert OPSEP run by the intel community. And Khashoggi was the bank. He was a major asset for both the CIA and MI6.
So let's pause on that. Epstein is now handling money for the guy who finances covert wars for Western intelligence.
If you're handling Khashoggi's money, you are, by definition, interfacing with the intelligence world. But he's not even the biggest connection. The sources claim Epstein's true mentor was a man named Sir Douglas Leese.
That's a name I never heard when the scandal broke. We heard about Prince Andrew, Clinton, who is Sir Douglas Leese.
A British defense contractor and, according to the source, a dedicated MI6 agent. He was involved in trafficking arms from China to Iran.
Arms from China to Iran. That sounds geopolitically insane.
It's a murky world. But Leese was also at the center of the Al Yamama deal, this massive oil for arms deal between the UK and Saudi Arabia.
But I've heard of that. It was hugely controversial.
It was maybe the biggest arms deal in history. And the source claims it created a black operations slush fund. That the money skimmed off this deal was used to finance everything from covert wars to radical Islamic terrorism.
That's a very heavy accusation.
It is. But the point for Epstein is this. Sir Douglas Leese, the man at the center of these black budgets, took Epstein under his wing. He was teaching him how the big boys move money. Billions.
So you have Epstein, who we were told was just a financial advisor, being mentored by guys creating slush funds for illegal wars.
And it gets more specific. It's not just guilt by association. The source details an operation Epstein handled personally. He brokered a deal to transfer the ownership of 2 airlines.
Which airlines?
CIA airlines. Specifically, the source mentions Southern Air Transport, which was a known CIA front used during Iran-Contra.
He brokered the sale of CIA front companies.
According to the source, yes. He set up companies in Ohio just to facilitate this. So you have to ask yourself, does a regular hedge fund guy get involved in restructuring the ownership of CIA assets?
No, that's not investment advice. That is logistical support for covert ops.
Exactly. This is where the claim that he was enmeshed in the system really gets its teeth. If you're moving airlines for the CIA and handling money for MI6's top arms dealers, you are an operational asset.
That leads to a really frightening thought about his immunity, why he never got in trouble.
Because the agencies don't write memos saying, leave this guy alone.
No, the protection is absolute, because the operative is holding the keys to all the darkest secrets. If he goes down, he takes the whole system down with him.
Right.
Which brings us to the business model itself. For years, the theory was that Epstein was running a blackmail operation, recording powerful men to control them.
That was the conspiracy theory, yeah.
But the sources we're looking at, they flip that completely on its head.
They do. Whitney Webb's argument is all about the mechanics of trust and money laundering.
Okay, break that down for us. Why wouldn't it be blackmail? It seems like perfect leverage.
Think about what his primary value was. It was tax avoidance and laundering illegal money. Billions of dollars.
Right.
That business requires absolute 100% trust. You do not give $1 billion of illicit cash to someone who might blackmail you. The second you blackmail a client, that relationship is over. The trust is gone.
That actually makes a lot of logical sense. So if it wasn't blackmail, what was the purpose of all the trafficking? Of the girls?
The source argues that it was a perk, a service provided to trusted clients. It wasn't a mechanism of control, it was a benefit of being in the club.
That is somehow even more disturbing.
It frames the abuse as a loyalty bonus. Do business with me, I'll hide your money, and I'll satisfy your darkest vices. It was about keeping the clients happy and loyal.
And there's a specific piece of evidence that supports this idea of him being protected. It involves Alex Acosta.
Right. Acosta was the U.S. attorney in Florida who gave Epstein that insane sweetheart deal the first time around.
The one where he served time in his own office.
Yeah.
And later he became Trump's labor secretary.
Exactly. And when he was being vetted for that job, he reportedly told the Trump transition team that he'd been told to go easy on Epstein back in Florida.
And what was the reason?
Because, quote, he belonged to intelligence.
He belonged to intelligence. That's not a metaphor.
It's a direct admission of state protection. It's the justice system hitting a wall called national security.
So let's look at who he was protecting. The legitimate clients. Leslie Wexner, the owner of Victoria's Secret.
Wexner is a huge piece of this. Epstein had full power of attorney over Wexner's billions, but the source throws in this detail about how Epstein got that job. That is just shocking.
This is the part that sounds like a movie.
Wexner's previous money manager, the guy who handled the accounts right before Epstein, he was killed.
Killed.
The source says he was shot in a mob hit right before Epstein took over.
That is incredibly convenient timing.
It cleared the path. And Wexner wasn't just a retail mogul. The source identifies him as a key player in something called the Mega Group.
What's the Mega Group?
It's described as this exclusive club of U.S. and Canadian billionaires, people like Max Fisher, the Bronfman family. And the source alleges this group had deep ties to the CIA, to organized crime, and to Israeli intelligence.
It seems like every single road leads back to this intersection of organized crime and intelligence.
That's the pattern. Look at his other major connection, Robert Maxwell.
Ghislaine Maxwell's father.
Robert Maxwell was a media tycoon, but it's widely accepted now that he was a super spy, an agent for MI6 and Mossad. When he died, mysteriously falling off his yacht, he was given a state funeral in Israel.
A state funeral for a media mogul.
You get that for services rendered.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Epstein tied to the daughter of a super spy working for the Mega Group handling money for arms dealers. It's a network.
And because of all this, he was completely embedded in the establishment.
Oh, completely. He was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, a trustee at Rockefeller University. You don't get in those rooms unless the system wants you there.
And the people he was advising. We're talking about the Clinton administration, Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan, Mohammed bin Salman, even Elon Musk.
The source frames it as him being the go-to guide for empire's criminal offshore money havens. He knew how to navigate the dark waters for the most powerful people on Earth.
So this all brings us to the big so what? Why does it matter if we see him as an intelligence asset versus just a monster?
Because the source argues that if you only focus on the sex crimes, you're missing the forest for the trees. You're looking at the crimes of an individual instead of the crimes of a corrupt system.
The crimes of the empires, they call it.
Right. The argument is that the intelligence apparatus Epstein served is responsible for devastation on a much larger scale. Things like the deindustrialization of the U.S., fueling drug epidemics, endless foreign wars.
So Epstein was a cog in the machine financing the people who make these decisions.
Precisely. And the source brings up a very current, very charged example. They cite a statistic about 300,000 missing children under the Biden administration.
That's a staggering number.
It is. And the source claims that former President Trump is attempting to rescue them. Now, we're just reporting what the source materials say. But regardless of your politics on that specific claim, the broader point the source is making is that the exploitation of the vulnerable is a systemic issue tied to these powerful networks.
It reframes the whole scandal. It's not about one bad apple. It's about the entire orchard.
It's about the infrastructure. Epstein was the infrastructure.
So, to recap, we start with a college dropout hired by an OSS vet. He goes to Wall Street, learns the dark arts of offshore finance, gets mentored by arms dealers and spies, brokers deals for CIA airlines, and manages money for billionaires tied to Mossad and the mob.
All while running an operation providing illicit perks to keep the whole machine greased.
And when he finally got caught, the reason given was he belongs to intelligence.
It paints a picture of a man who was never really a private citizen. He was an operative. His wealth, his access, his immunity, it was all part of the job.
It's a lot to process. It really makes you question the entire financial system.
And who is actually pulling the levers behind the curtain?
Which leaves us with a pretty haunting final thought. If the source's logic holds up, if intelligence agencies rely on these offshore, off-the-books operators to fund their darkest projects, Epstein couldn't have been the only one.
That's the scary part. The system requires Bagman. You can't run an empire without them.
So the real question is, how many other Epsteins are operating in the global financial system right now? Quiet, wealthy advisors moving money for the CIA or MI6, entirely unnoticed just because they haven't been caught in a scandal.
They're the ones we've never heard of. And that's probably exactly how they want it.
That does it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.